Chapter 6 of Tractate Arachin covers the laws of temple treasury auctions. The first Mishnah says, the appraisal and auctioning of the property of orphans is done for 30 days, while the appraisal and auctioning of consecrated property belonging to the temple is done for 60 days, and this sale is announced throughout this period in the morning and the evenings. The Gemara says it's announced in the morning and evenings, as that's when workers enter and leave their positions, and if somebody wants to buy this property, they'll tell their workers to inspect it then and then again later, so the potential purchasers will confirm with their workers. It quotes places where this concept is similarly taught. It gives an example of somebody auctioning a sale and offering it to be bought for a marriage contract or for a lender to have his debt repaid, which are both specified as lenders are more lenient in what they accept, and marriage contracts are often collected in increments. There's an opinion which disagrees with our Mishnah, which says the appraisal and sale of orphans' property occurs for 60 days, although some say this variation is only if the announcement was made on a Monday or Thursday. As for when exactly the court is auctioning off orphans' property, some say this is only done if interest payments are consuming it, others say it's only done to pay for the widow's marriage contract, as her support payments consume it. The dispute by the latter, if this is done to repay a marriage contract, is as it said, a widow's personal earnings go to her heirs, but others say sometimes they don't earn enough to balance what they're consuming from the estate. It disputes between these opinions from a couple of quoted cases, trying to prove whether they imply like either opinion. It's explained that if the liable party, the dying husband, admits that he hasn't repaid his marriage contract debt, it would be repaid from the auctioned estate. Some say that the reason the auctioning of the orphan's estate for a marriage contract is simply to increase the likelihood of marriage contracts being filled out in general, so as to encourage more people to marry, meaning this would not apply by a divorcee. One sage said, initially before being disproven, he wouldn't collect any property from orphans at all, which is either as orphan minors cannot do mitzvahs, so they don't have their repayment of lenders enforced, as that's a mitzvah. Others say as it was perhaps possible the dying father quickly paid off his creditor before he died. The practical difference between these would be if the father admitted that he hadn't repaid his debt, or if he was under a ban before he died. It is ruled, however, if there is a ban on a person when he died, we collect from his orphan's property to repay his creditors, meaning if there wasn't such a ban, we don't do this. It brings sources for this. Third explanation as to why we don't collect property from orphans. It's possible the father repaid his debt and has a receipt hidden somewhere that his kids just don't know about. This would not apply by marriage contract, as a woman can collect hers even not in her husband's presence, which was instituted to make marriage contract collection easier and increase marriages. A lender, however, can collect in a borrower's absence, which was simply instituted to prevent people from being able to take loans and then flee to distant countries. The law is ruled. The court does not involve itself with the property of orphans unless the father specifically said to repay a debt before he died, in which case the court always only involves itself as an administrator, unless witnesses testify that the deceased father's property was stolen, as we don't assume the witnesses are lying. New Mishnah. If somebody consecrated all of his properties and he needed to repay his marriage contract, it's a dispute when he divorces her as to whether he needs to take a vow prohibiting her benefit. Similarly, if somebody's a guarantor for a woman's marriage contract and her husband divorced her and can't pay it, the husband must take a vow that he won't give her a benefit, out of concern that this was all a plan with his wife to divorce her, collect repayment from the guarantor, and then just remarry his wife. The Gemara says, the dispute by consecrated property applies as they disagree on if a person would try to conspire and steal consecrated property. This dispute only applies by a healthy person, as we see elsewhere a very sick man is believed to reclaim his property from consecrated property, as he won't personally benefit from it. Others disagree and say it's the inverse, that a healthy person is agreed that they'd conspire to steal consecrated property, and the dispute in our Mishnah is on if a publicly made vow can be annulled. Alternatively, they agree that it can, and they disagree if a vow made on public consensus can be annulled. Although in the end it's explained that they disagree as to whether a person can petition a sage to annul a consecration, which it sources. As for the ploy to divorce one's wife to collect a guarantee for the marriage contract and then remarry her, it gives an incident where a sage was recommended to do this by privately divorcing his wife, and it was permitted there as he was the guarantor's actual son, and he was a young rabbinical scholar who really needed money, although it didn't end up working out anyways. As it turns out, he was a Cohen, and he wouldn't be allowed to remarry his divorced wife. Some clarify the case to be where it was a Kablan guarantor, where there's a higher degree of responsibility, and this was made either as the sage had property during his marriage, but he later lost it, or the guarantee was just made as he was the sage's father. Although it is ruled, even if the husband or borrower don't have any property at the time of the marriage or a loan, a Kablan vowed guarantee can still be made and must be repaid, besides for the guarantor of a marriage contract, as there's no cost to this guarantee, and it doesn't cost the wife anything at all. It discusses whether this principle would apply by other similar cases. New Mishnah. If somebody consecrated all of his property and he needed to repay his marriage contract or a loan, they can't collect their repayment directly from the consecrated property. Rather, a redeemer needs to redeem the consecrated property on condition it's given to repay the marriage contract or loan. So if a borrower consecrated a property worth 90 coins and his debt was 100 coins, the creditor would redeem the consecrated property for a single dinar coin, on condition it repays his debt, and the debt would increase very slightly accordingly. The Gemara explains, all of this is necessary to prevent people from thinking that consecrated property can be used without redemption. Evidently, this whole Mishnah disagrees with the opinion that says, if the man's debt was equal to the value of what he consecrated, he can redeem it as is, with equal being defined here as up to half. New Mishnah. We do collect collateral from people who make erech vows, however, we always take care to let the man at least keep food for 30 days, clothing for 12 months, a bed with bedding, shoes, and tefillin, although only for himself, not for his family. If he was a craftsman, he's allowed to keep 2 tools of each type needed for his craft. A carpenter would get to keep 2 planes and 2 saws, and some say a farmer gets to keep 2 oxen, and some say a donkey driver keeps his donkey. If he had a bunch of spare tools of one type and a few of another type, he's given 2 of the kind that he has a lot of and whatever he has from with few. If somebody consecrates his possessions, he needs to redeem his tefillin. The Gemara sources this principle that a vower who's having property collected is allowed to keep his own basic necessities, and that applies specifically to himself and not his family. The reason some didn't allow a donkey driver to keep their donkey was as they held it was an asset, not a tool. By the last point on somebody having single tools of small amounts, it specifies that he's not permitted to sell the more numerous tool to buy spares of the lesser ones, even though before he was able to lend out and exchange his tools for others. Also, it says, when somebody consecrates his possessions, this includes his tefillin. There's a mitzvah over there, but even by a regular sale, if somebody sold their possessions, it would include his tefillin. New Mishnah. If somebody consecrates all of his property to the temple, or if he makes an erech vow, the treasurers have no rights to his wife or children's clothing, or any clothes arranged to have dyed for his wife or children, or any new shoes purchased for them. It said slaves are sold with garments to increase their value, animals are waited until market date to be sold, and jewels are sold in large cities to increase their value. So too, by consecrated property, its value is assessed according to its current time and location. The Gemara quotes a source for this principle. And that's the end of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Tractate Arachin covers the laws of consecrating land by the Jubilee year. The first Mishnah says, regarding somebody's ancestral inherited property, every 50 years by the Jubilee year, the Yovel year, it reverts back to its original owner. If such a field is consecrated, he's given a chance to redeem it before the Jubilee year, wherein he'd retain ownership of the field. If he doesn't do this, then when the Jubilee year comes, the land ownership switches to the Kohanim instead, and he loses all ownership permanently. A field is not consecrated if there's less than 2 years until the Jubilee year, and a field cannot be redeemed less than a year after a Jubilee year. Incomplete years, so just months, are not taken into account when somebody calculates the redemption cost of their consecrated field. The temple treasury, however, can do this to their benefit. The Gemara clarifies, it means that a consecrated field is redeemed with a price reduction only if there are over 2 years until the Jubilee year, meaning it's not actually forbidden to make such a redemption, it's just strongly advised not to. If somebody consecrates his field during the actual Jubilee year, some say it's consecrated and the owner pays 50 selas to redeem it, and others say it's just not consecrated at all. This is as this latter opinion holds that during the Jubilee year, the Kohanim immediately receive the consecrated property with no necessary redemption. The opinion which says a consecration is done holds that the temple retains ownership of the property, and from there it's granted to the Kohanim. It disputes between these from verses along with some further points. When the Mishnah said we don't redeem an ancestral field less than a year after the Jubilee year, this opinion which says a field cannot be consecrated during the Jubilee year says that this just means that if a consecrated field is redeemed in the middle of any regular year, if the year hasn't ended, the redemption price is not reduced. The other opinion, which says property can be consecrated in the Jubilee year, essentially holds that it's saying the reason ancestral land isn't redeemed less than a year after a Jubilee year is because we don't count just months in this calculation for the temple treasury. It sources the remaining principles. Mishnah. If somebody consecrates his ancestral field during the time when the Jubilee year is done, when he redeems his field, it's done at a rate of 50 silver shkalim for every area where a chomer measure of barley can be sown. If there are pits or rocks going down or up above 10 handbreadths, they're not counted in the measurement. If they're less than this, they are counted. If somebody consecrated his field 2 or 3 years before the Jubilee year and then wants to redeem it, he gives a sela and a pundion coin for every remaining year. If he says he wants to just give the current year's amount for that year, so 1 year at a time, that's not allowed. It all needs to be given at once. This applies if the original owner is redeeming it, or if somebody else is redeeming it. The only difference is that the original owner must give an additional fifth when he does so. The Gemara says this particular given measurement ratio, also referred to as a base car, applies to where seed can be grown too, not just by grain, if scattered by hand in an average density. The reason the pits aren't included in this calculation is as they're filled with water, so they can't even be used for planting, and pits and rocks smaller than 10 handbreadths are too small to be significant, so are just considered to be part of the land. It also clarifies A sella and a pundion are given to redeem a field for each remaining year until the Jubilee year, and also a deduction is taken for each year that the field was owned by the temple for. It states a similar quote saying that this amount must be paid all at once, sourcing this New Mishnah. If somebody consecrates his ancestral field and then redeems it, he retains ownership of it over the Jubilee year. If his son redeemed it, it would go to his father. If somebody else redeemed it and the original owner purchased it from them, it would nevertheless go to Kohanim by the Jubilee year. If a Kohen redeemed it and the Jubilee year comes, he doesn't just get to keep it, it's returned to the temple, divided, and redistributed among Kohanim. The Gemara quotes sources for the fact that we said a consecrated field that's redeemed by a man's son is retained by him across the Jubilee year, that this applies by a son specifically, and his brother doesn't stand in his place like exists by the levirate marriage. They said a daughter cannot do this. If a woman consecrates a field as to if possibly it's her husband or son that can redeem it for her, that's unresolved. If somebody consecrated his field less than 2 years before the Jubilee year, it'd still go to the Kohanim. It sources the fact that if a Kohen redeems a field, it's still divided by the Jubilee year. New Mishnah. If the Jubilee year arrived and the field hasn't been redeemed, the Kohanim enter it and take possession, and it's a dispute if they need to give its value to the temple treasury. Some even say they don't need to enter it, it's just left until somebody redeems it, and in the meanwhile it's called an abandoned field. The Kohanim cannot take possession of a field until the Jubilee year, after somebody redeems it. The Gemara says, the dispute as to if the Kohanim need to pay the value of the field to acquire it is based on verses. It also sources the third opinion that says the Kohanim do not have the field transferred to them on the Jubilee year. It disputes these between the interpretation of various cases. It said that a consecrated ancestral field goes to the Kohanim by the Jubilee year only if somebody other than the original owner had redeemed it. Otherwise, the temple treasury would retain it. According to the opinion that the field doesn't go to the Kohanim by the Jubilee year, it asks, after this, in the year after the Jubilee year, is the original owner considered to be like everybody else? Or does he still maintain a degree of ownership in that he can recover the field by redeeming it? A source seems to imply that he's treated like everybody else, but some explain this case to be where the consecrated field was taken by a Kohanim, who then consecrated it themselves, so the original owner has no ownership of it anymore, which it sources. It tries to prove either way that the original owner would retain a degree of ownership by a typical case of the Jubilee year passing, but that's largely unsuccessful. The Mishnah. If somebody purchased a field from his father and his father died, so the son consecrated the field, it's treated like an ancestral field. If he consecrated the field before the father died, it's treated like an acquired, purchased field, according to some. Others say even here it's like an ancestral field, and they base that off of a verse. An acquired purchased field does not go to the Kohanim by the Jubilee year because you can't consecrate something that's not yours. Kohanim and Levium can always consecrate and redeem their ancestral fields, both before and after the Jubilee year. The Gemara further sources the debate as to if a son consecrates a field owned by his own father while his father is alive, if it's treated like an ancestral or acquired property. It goes off of interpretation of verses. We said Kohanim and Levium can always redeem their fields as they can uniquely do it after the Jubilee year. It says they can always consecrate their field, even though that applies to everybody, but it just said this for grammatical formatting reasons. And that's the end of chapter 7.